Alright, so here we go with video 2, the second one we have going on here. That is, so the first thing we have here is our Bill of Rights, and then also Amendments 11 and 12. Now the rest of them will come up throughout history, so these are just helpful hints, right? Here we go. Now the First Amendment everyone sees there, and everyone knows is the right of freedom of speech. But it is more. It's also freedom of the press, people able to write whatever they want, freedom of the people to peacefully assemble, to petition the government for rights or grievances, protect First Amendment, and support these things. So again, we have all these. Also, the idea of no establishment of religion is going to be a reoccurring theme. So that is the First Amendment, and it's a pretty big one. Now the Second Amendment is one that's highly controversial today, given the nature of these mass shootings and things we've seen, especially here recently in the news and what happened in Orlando at the Club Pulse. But the Second Amendment allows you to bear arms, and there's a lot of just different things. Again, enumerated, looking at it, it says, well, without restrictions, but implied says, you know, you got to have some rules. Can you give it to a mentally insane person? Should you be able to buy military-grade weapons? There's a lot of big questions that come up, and there's two different schools of thought on that. Right? But you do have the right to own a gun in a correct manner. Now, Amendment 3, this was a big thing, especially given what happened with the American Revolution, and that is no quartering of soldiers within the home. They really didn't want to have to fill that ability, and so if you have someone in the military today, they have forts and things like that where they're able to live, and people do not have to have them themselves. All right? The Fourth Amendment, now this is a major one here, okay? This protects against unlawful search and seizures, and it also brings up the idea of a warrant. So what does that mean? If they want to search you, pull you over, get in your house, they must have a warrant. However, there's something called probable cause. If you're driving down the street and you have your own little personal Wiz Khalifa cloud following you, that's called probable cause. If they ask to look in something and you act really erratic and get vulgar with them, that is probable cause. So again, they have to have a warrant, but if you do things that make you look conspicuous or out in the open, that's probable cause, and they can do what they want at that point. So there's that. Now the next one coming up here we have is called due process. Now due process is something that is unique to American government, and then later on it kind of filters out through other ones. But due process is the whole idea of court proceedings. If you do get in trouble, what happens? Now some things that are included in due process are covered here in the Fifth Amendment. All right? So we have first off the right to a grand jury. Anytime there is a big capital murder case, a major case, something like that, a cop killing someone, etc., it has to go to grand jury before they even have a trial to determine is it even able to go to trial. Now the next thing under due process, and we'll get these later on, is you have a right to an attorney. You see there's no self-incrimination. That means you don't have to speak until you have an attorney. That also means I plead the fifth, as Dave Chappelle put it, I plead the fifth. And you don't want to say stuff that could ruin your reputation or make you look like a guilty party. And lastly, this guy's a major figure, and he's been big all over the summer, and that is O.J. O.J. famously went to a trial, and all these things have come out, you know, about the O.J. trial and different things like that. But regardless, they can never again hold a trial against O.J. for the murder of Nicole Brown and Nicole Brown's boyfriend. Why? The court already said that he was not guilty. That's called double jeopardy. You can't try someone for the same crime. Now, if he kills somebody else, they can try him for that. But they can't try him for the same crime. Okay? Now, the Sixth Amendment is the idea of a right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury. So once we've gone through the Fifth Amendment and you've gone and they've decided you're going to have a trial, you have an attorney, your trial has to be quick as possible. You have a right to a jury of your peers. That means people like you. Now, they cannot know you or anything like that. If they do, they get excused from jury duty. Now, the other big thing is you have the right to be confronted by your accusers. That means if they have a trial against you, they have to take the witness stand and say what you did or what's the big deal. And that's something that's also unique to America. All right. Now, the Seventh Amendment basically decides a monetary value. They decided way back when anything over $20 would be able to go to court over. And then keep in mind, guys, in 1776, $20 is a lot of money. Whereas today, some people go, well, it's not so much, but when you have kids, $20 is a lot of money. And then trial for valued things, again, is that. So that's basically determining all of that. Now, the Eighth Amendment, what happens about this? Now, generally, and hopefully you'll never figure this out because it won't come against you. If they do find you and they're going to put you in court, they can't have an excessive bail. They can't sit there and go, oh, well, you robbed a convenience store, your bail is $2 million. That's excessive. Okay, if you have whatever it is, they can do that. Now, the other thing is cruel and unusual punishment. They can't sit there and, as you see the kid in the stocks with his head, they can't do that to you. There's ways of going about this. In other countries, it's much, much crazier than it is here. Luckily, we don't live in those countries, right? Good. Now, the Ninth Amendment, you see the little girl there? Shh. The Ninth Amendment basically says the Constitution is too short. We can't put everything in here. But just because it's in here doesn't mean you're not protected by that right. And the shh is called the silence of the Constitution. So basically they're saying as things have come up through history, even though it's not written in the Constitution, it could still be your right. So that's our Ninth Amendment. Now the last of the Bill of Rights is the 10th Amendment, and this gives us a big saying, which is the Civil War is over this. We have problems in civil rights over this, and that is the phrase states' rights. Basically, any rights that weren't written down by the federal government belong to the states. Now, what rights would those include? Marriage license and speed limits and things of that nature. Whereas if it's a federal law, it belongs to the federal government. Remember, federal has more authority over the states. Remember that, Who's Your Daddy, Gibbon versus Ogden. But this gives rise to states' rights, and some of the things that came up was, well, the Constitution doesn't say anything about slavery, and so that was the states' rights in the Civil War. Well, the Constitution doesn't say anything about black and white kids going to school, and that's our integration of the 1960s. And so those are some big things we'll see about states' rights when we get there. Now, the 11th Amendment. You cannot sue a state. You can't sit there and go and sue Tennessee, for example, living in Mississippi. It has to be one person against one person, or one person against one company, or one person against a school board, something like that. Now, why do they do that? If you're suing a state, you're suing multiple citizens. And now I have, maybe this is a dated reference, but these are still two of the greatest basketball players to ever live, Larry Bird and Michael Jordan. The whole idea there is one-on-one. You want to see who's better in a one-on-one situation. So 11th Amendment, one-on-one, one person against one person, not a state. You're not allowed to do that. All right, and lastly, we have the 12th Amendment. Now, you see the guys here at the bottom. This is Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. This is why we have this. First off, in the early elections, whoever won the first ballot was president. Whoever came in second was vice president. These two guys really didn't like each other. And so nothing got done. And so eventually they put this one in there and they said, okay, you have to vote for president and vice president on separate ballots. That means if your name is for president, you can't be in the running for vice president. And so that's really, really good. So basically we went from one ballot to two ballots. The 12th, 1 to 2. So those are our first 12 amendments. The rest of them we'll get as we'll get through them in history. But this is, again, setting up before we start moving.